Some very good news out of Texas. The Texas Supreme Court has essentially authorized Governor Abbott to bring out the handcuffs and the leg irons. Why? To round up these Texas Democrats, the runaway Democrats, at least if they show their face in the state, and they can't stay out of state forever. These are people who do have lives, they do have families, they do have kids. So yeah, they can go off to Colombia and they can go off to Europe for a week. And I'm sure there's an elaborate Democratic support structure to help these characters out. But I think their lobbying mission to pass H.R. 1 or some comprehensive federal voting bill that would override the Texas voter law, this is not going to happen. And I think it's dawned on them. And so one or two of them have already returned. And I think the rest of them will eventually come back. And when they come back, there's going to be some marshals waiting for them. In fact, the sergeant at arms has already served warrants on the offices of all these Democrats. There's a warrant out for their arrest. Now, interestingly, the Democrats had gone running to a Democratic judge and said, hey, you've got to invalidate the governor's authority. And the judge issued an injunction saying that for a period of time, I think it was 2 weeks, that the governor's the governor's order would be invalid. But Abbott appealed to the Texas Supreme Court, and boom, the Texas Supreme Court vacated this judge's decision and said, look, the law empowers you to go ahead. Now, very interestingly, there's a kind of corollary debate going on to all this, which involves Politifact, the fact-checking site, the bogus fact-checking site, and Ted Cruz. And we're going to see how deceitful Politifact is here, because Ted Cruz said, quote, there is clear legal authority to handcuff and put in leg irons legislators that are trying to stop the legislature from being able to do business. Politifact says, quote, false. There is no legal clarity. So this is Politifact essentially taking Ted Cruz. And remember, this is the kind of stuff, Politifact at one time was kind of the fact checker for Facebook. So these kinds of fact checks have a very insidious purpose. It's not just to sort of make a kind of rhetorical declaration. It is to try to incite social media to ban people and to deplatform them. This is what the fact-checking game is about these days. But let's look to see if what Ted Cruz said is in fact false. Ted Cruz said, quote, there is clear legal authority to handcuff and put in leg irons the Texas Democrats. Now, let's look at the law. The law is actually pretty clear. It says, quote, all absentees for whom no sufficient excuse is made may, by order of a majority of those present, be sent for and arrested wherever they may be found, end quote. There it is. So there is, in the Texas Constitution itself and in the accompanying rules of the Constitution, clear, specified legal authority. It's almost as if you take a provision of the U.S. Constitution, and there it is. It says exactly what Ted Cruz said. Now, if you read the Politifact article relies on a kind of second point that is true, but less important. And so they say this. They say, quote, because the absent lawmakers aren't charged with a crime, it is unclear how the word arrest should be interpreted in this context. This is because no Texas court has reviewed how this provision is to be enforced. So basically what Politifact is saying is this. They're saying, yeah, the law does say arrested, but normally people are arrested for a crime. The Texas Democrats, strictly speaking, haven't committed a crime. They've merely absconded their legislative duty, and no court has ever considered a similar case, so there's no precedent for this. But this is just, you could call it a way of disputing the meaning or the application of a law. Even if there's some disputed interpretation, like how is the court going to rule, we really don't know if arrested here means literally arrested. Nevertheless, it doesn't follow that what Ted Cruz said is false. It just follows that Ted Cruz has given the mainstream reading of the law. Now, it's possible to read the law another way. In other words, there may be place for reasonable people to disagree. But see, this is the point. Reasonable disagreement is not factual error. So the essence of the fact-checking game is to pretend that if they disagree with you, you are making factually false statements. And that's not the case. And we know that Ted Cruz's interpretation of the law was sustained because the Texas Supreme Court said, we agree with Ted Cruz. They didn't say those words, we agree with Ted Cruz. But what they did in authorizing the governor to bring out the leg irons is they affirmed the reading, the literal reading of the law that was Ted Cruz's reading.
But he was Solicitor General of Texas, so he knows the law.
So here's Debbie pointing out the obvious, which is that you have two authorities here, right? On the one hand, you've got some, kind of ponytailed Politifact fact checker, hey, Austin, why don't you devote, 90 minutes to reviewing whether what Ted Cruz said here is correct, right? So this little pencil head is like, yeah, I'm going to review it. I'm going to find out there's no precedent. And on the other hand, you got Ted Cruz, brilliant constitutional scholar, Yale Law School. Here's a guy who's Solicitor General of Texas. Here's a guy who has been talked about as a nominee for the Supreme Court. So it's not really an exact matchup of wits. It's basically, there's no comparison between the authorities here. And it kind of shows you how ridiculous our public debate has become when these fact-checking sites presume. I mean, they're fact-checking Rand Paul on COVID. They're fact-checking Ted Cruz on what the Texas Constitution says. And this is a case ultimately of the moronic student attempting to grade the teacher.